for joining us from all around the world. We start our program today with an important webinar on world peace and conflict resolutions through music, dance, and dialogue. Our first special guest is Professor Marc Gopin. His work on peace building and conflict resolutions goes back to many years. I leave the introduction of the distinguished panel to himself, just to remind you that you can read and watch everything on our website, peacefestivals.org or earthdance.tv. Marc, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza. It's an honor to work with you after all of these years. We've been friends for so long, and I so admire from a distance all of your work. And it's such an honor to be part of the peace tourism concept, and especially to be meeting with all of you folks, young folks dancing around the world today. It's an amazing thing to participate in for me through this venue. And I want to introduce the folks on the panel. My fellow panelist is Dr. Lisa Shirk, who is one of the great pioneers in peace, the field of peace building and conflict resolution, and particularly has an expertise in the power of ritual and symbol and many other things that she'll describe. And we've known each other for many, many years, and I'm so thrilled for her to be here. Sitting to my right is Crystal Gopin, and Crystal has done wonderful work on conflict resolution and peace building over the years, and her bio is also on the site, and she'll be one of the respondents. And Mr. Nicholas Sherwood, truth be told, my PhD student, who has been doing amazing work in psychology and the psychology of healing and peace building over the years. And so we're all going to have a conversation. We're going to start with some of our statements about the subject, and I wish that we could be talking to all of you at the same time and getting your feedback and questions, but maybe this will be just an introduction in the beginning of longer conversations someday through Zoom and other venues. So let me just begin with the reason why we feel this is so important to reflect on with you today as you're about to dance to music. Dance, music, ritual, and art are so very much at the core of the human experience of everything that is beautiful in this world. At the same time, we live in a world that needs great healing, more love, more compassion, more understanding, more reasoning together in a logical and reasonable way on how to make societies more just, more fair, less violent, and more peaceful. We who are on this panel have each spent a lot of our lives engaged in the theory and practice of moving society toward more tolerance, less violence, more justice, and more peace, and especially through understanding, learning, and the commitment to science. We have each found our way to the critical importance of the mind as in need of greater integration between senses, the embodied experience, and our emotions, and the profoundly intellectual, scientific task of building peace in a complicated world of conflict. We are convinced that every child, every adult, every person needs a better reframing of the mind around the power of music, dance, art, emotions to play a more positive role in the thinking about ethics, social justice, human rights, healing the wounded earth, the climate, and even diplomacy and economics. We've all had experience in doing all of them, and we can make progress with that with good work, and we need your help. We need you to consider the future of your careers and your lives. Even as you are dancing and having a great time, we need you to consider this as an integrated part of your life. Everywhere we turn, we find that true change makers have an integration of the truth, of the beauty of the arts and music and dance, together with the truth and beauty of compassion, of kindness, care for others, right up to the tough work of environmental change, climate restoration, and a vigorous shift away from destructive substances such as fossil fuels, also violence reduction, conflict resolution, and peace building as the goal. Essentially, we have established an intimate relationship between the senses and your ability to do the good, the right, and the just in a world that needs peace. So this session is going to explore that. And we're gonna study together for a little bit. We're gonna have some fun together. And I wanna now introduce my amazing colleague, who I learn from more every day, Dr. Lisa Shirk.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Mark and Crystal. I also greatly admire and learn from your approach. So I have a few slides I'd love to share, just some of the stories of strategic arts-based peace building that I have learned about over the years. So I very much believe that the arts are not only fun and beautiful, but they're also strategic. That means they actually have an effect. And it's often really because of the way our brain is constructed that, you know, we think that we have to make logic in this front part of the brain by using all these words and fancy scholars. But actually, a lot of the human mind is oriented more toward the arts. And so we can understand things through music and dance and just beautiful things that often we can't express with words. So the arts actually really transcends and is able to be embraced by people who can't maybe articulate or talk about the ways that they're changing. So I'm going to just give you a few examples here of the kinds of ways that the arts are being used to support peace and justice around the world. In Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, music is really a mechanism for discussing social and political issues. So youth use hip hop to teach others about joblessness, corruption, class differences, AIDS, and other problems. In parts of the US and Africa, jazz is being used as also sort of communicating liberation. You know, with jazz music, there's a lot of improvisation, and it's actually the form of the music itself is liberation, is liberatory, but it's also being used in places that need liberation. So jazz was invented in New Orleans by the Mississippi River. And a lot of jazz musicians went from New Orleans over to different parts of Africa. And activists in South Africa really began to use this sort of jazz music and jazz culture during the apartheid era in their own fight for civil rights and liberty. Art can also help us envision what a future peaceful world might look like for us. So in South Sudan, you know, the youth there have faced a lot of violence. They have experienced a lot in their lifetime, but they use murals and visuals to help them imagine what their land, what their region of the world might look like in some more peaceful time. Art is also trauma healing. So in Sri Lanka, children and adults engage in music, painting, theater, yoga, sculpture in what they call the Butterfly Peace Garden. You know, in Sri Lanka, they've experienced war. They also had a tsunami that really devastated the island. So the children have experienced a lot of loss. And I think particularly for trauma healing, and we know the world needs trauma healing now in the midst of climate change and the pandemic and violence. How can art give us the resilience that we need, heal us enough to be able to be agents for peace in the world? Music also helps to improve our self-esteem. In Venezuela, a conductor has created orchestras and choirs for low-income youth as a means of contributing to sort of their involvement as citizens, as actors in their own environment, to really improve their self-esteem and empower them to be able to take action. In the Philippines, theater artists tour the island of Mindanao, which has experienced violence and war in a sense, and they use that theater performance to introduce the concept of peaceful coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and the indigenous communities there. So I'm just going to pause for a second and just say, what is art? You know, so the arts have been used for centuries to communicate the human experience in ways that have sometimes nurtured peace and other times have fostered violence. So, you know, people who are intent on doing harm also can use the arts, because the arts are powerful, and there's the strategic use of the arts, and people who want to harm others know that as well. And I think sometimes for peace builders, we think that, oh, the arts is soft, you know, we need to write fancy books, or we need to have a mediation and talk about the problem. But I think that really undercuts, again, what the arts can do. So I advocate that we see the arts as really having a strategic impact. Art is not purely functional. It can serve social functions of healing, of mediation, of advocating for justice. Art's a tool that can communicate and transform the way people think and the way they act. So just a brief pause for what is peace building. The field of peace building has grown tremendously over the last 20 years. So now there's huge programs at the United Nations funding peace building, and there are school programs in teaching peace building at every single level up to the PhD level. And it's really about studying the interdisciplinary ways, so psychology, economics, political science, all those different disciplines. How do they all contribute to preventing, reducing, transforming, and helping people recover from violence at all levels of society? I want to close with just another example from Iraq. So I met Karim Wasfi. He was the director of the Baghdad Orchestra, and he would take his cello into places where violence has occurred in Iraq. So here he's playing at the site of a car bomb, and his music really reclaims the space for humanity and provides healing and hope to survivors. So the music just pervades this area that is so damaged. And now the youth in the Iraqi Youth Orchestra are using music also for trauma healing. They're called the bravest orchestra in the world. Because despite the continuance of terrorist attacks, sectarian violence in the country, a group of young Iraqi musicians, and they're Arabs and Kurds, men and women, and almost all of them have been self-taught. They meet once a year to play in an orchestra, and they audition for that via YouTube. And they say it's not an orchestra for peace, it's an orchestra against ignorance. So just in closing, this is just a map of what is peace building. It's all these different things. It's learning how to engage in conflict without violence. It's reducing the kind of direct violence we see in the world. It's transforming relationships by restorative justice, transitional justice, good governance, policymaking, and it's training and education so more people feel empowered to make the world better on their own. So I'm going to end there. Thanks for giving me some time to talk.
This is wonderful. And it brings up so much that I could talk about from other experiences around the world. We're both very close to a man, Friar Ivo Markovic in Sarajevo, who has, even during the war and since, pioneered music as transformation, specifically among Orthodox Christians, Catholic Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And to this day, not only they sing together vigorously, and our classes go to visit them, but they sing together the most sacred secular and religious songs of each group. And all of them take turns doing it. It's quite a wonderful thing that they brought up to me. I had no idea how far it had gone in Iraq with that courageous effort of that gentleman. So before I talk too much, I'm going to turn it over to get some reactions from Crystal and then from Nick. So Crystal, what would you like to add to this?
I You know, my first career actually was in kindergarten teaching, working with specifically kids from age 3 to 6. So music, singing, and dancing were a key part of learning and also bonding with each other. So this is where I actually learned the power of what that provides in just not children, but also for us grown-ups. And so, you know, I kind of utilized that as, you know, principles and values, but I never ever recognized how powerful both music is and dancing till my father got Alzheimer's. And then as he progressed in his disease and he no longer was able to really speak, and he forgot, you know, who I was, he couldn't recognize me. You know, there's all this emotion that goes through. But, you know, one thing that I did with him is, you know, I just grabbed him, I stood up, I held him, and in holding him, we started to dance. We started to sing. And even though he was very much progressed in his disease, it was like we recognized each other. So he didn't forget this. So that's kind of what I thought was really important for us to recognize how powerful it is, not just with each other, but also, you know, close up. So
yeah, it's a really interesting thing to. So one of the things that we do is that we both experience these things and then we analyze them, because it's one part of our brain experiencing it, because everything we do is a part of our brain. We feel something, we dance, it's exercising one part of us. But then another part of our brain says, well, what just happened? So self-reflection is a very, very high level of brain activity. And the more that we self-examine, the more that we self-examine, the better we are, the more of our minds that we use. And so in a certain sense, Alzheimer's attacks certain parts of the mind, and they become diseased and can't be used. And yet the brain is so resilient that the dance and the music can reach someone when the other part of the mind is gone or is attacked. War is like that too, because sometimes you have a family member or somebody from another group, and the part of their brain that can think rationally is gone. They hate you. But when you sing together and you dance together, something shifts and they discover you in a different way. So it's an amazing way in which we can use the best of what we know in science, but also look into our hearts for how we reach people. So Nick, how do you react to all of this?
Well, Mark and Lisa, you both raise this question of science and art, science or art, science and art put together. So my trained as a psychological scientist, and so keenly interested in mental health, well-being, how this plays out in conflict spaces and peace spaces. And so for a long time, most of my peace building solutions, most of my strategies, hardcore empirical, right? A few years back, some friends and I would go to Bonnaroo Music Festival every single year. Go to concerts together. We're a group of former musicians, actors, directors, etc. So definitely creative type. While at Bonnaroo, we hatched this plan to make a nonprofit focusing on promoting well-being and doing mental health work at music festivals, taking once upon a time a very scientific model and now reframing it and translating it for folks that I think the science model doesn't really make a lot of sense. But as we started going to these music festivals and these concerts, and we're doing workshops, etc., we start talking to folks who I would say are not insured, don't have a lot of money for mental health services. These are definitely trauma survivors. Some are immigrants to the US, refugees, etc. And Lisa and Mark, you both also talked about resilience. For these folks, doing intrapersonal conflict resolution, which is very much what I'm interested in. For them, going to a music festival, going to a concert, that's a shot in the arm of resilience. that's a protective factor that's going to sit with them for weeks or for months or for a year. For some of these folks, you know, going to Bonnaroo and then, you know, whatever, a music festival right after, that's like the 2 weeks out of the year that they're allowed to play. It's the 2 weeks out of the year that they feel freedom, right? That they feel peace, creativity, et cetera, et cetera. And so, wrapping all of this together, I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that the arts, it is magic made real in my mind. At times it's indescribable. It harkens back to our unconscious understanding, but there are hardcore empirical, measurable intervention effects that come from it, right? So we're all speaking one collective language. We have perhaps you know, Lisa, you talked about perhaps the cerebral cortex and then the hindbrain, et cetera. For me, this is a metaphor that we have different entry points into very much the same language, perhaps using different words to describe it. But this thing that we're all talking about, it is magic. It is incredible, right? And I'm sure that every single one of us has seen transformation come from the arts. Yeah, and I'm pumped to be on this panel along with y'all, to be able to talk about this. But yeah, that's what I got.
I remember, you know, one of the things we do when we do this peace building work over the years is we work with people in very bad situations of conflict, and we go to those places, and we have projects in different parts of the world that, you know, we can't mention. It's people are under fire from different governments, and it's very delicate, and it's amazing what happens when music comes into the room, because we can do all of our trainings, but it's at the music part that everyone starts to weep because they haven't been able to share their sadness. We're in a professional environment, we're doing dialogue, sorry, and suddenly the music comes on and people sing and something else happens in the room. There's a deeper level of understanding. And I've seen this myself many times. I work with women refugees who are all over conflict zones in certain places in the Middle East. And those refugees are, they're so resilient, and they really want to study conflict resolution and human rights. And at the same time, they all have people they've lost. They all are under fire. Many are quietly going to us and then going back into underneath bombs. And they have no place to grieve together. And then we sing, and it all comes up. And that's what psychology and therapy calls a cathartic experience, catharsis. And a catharsis is a kind of purging, but it's also like a different language or a different way in which the mind copes with massive stress. So one of the things that we're looking into in our field is that instead of this being accidental to the work we do in, say, negotiations or conflict resolution, how could we possibly make this the way in which people relate in diplomacy and peace across enemy lines? How do we take the incredible experiences that we all have from music and dance and the arts and make it into the way in which we do business, the way in which we relate to each other? Because after all, business, capitalism, private enterprise, they're all a way that everybody makes a living. It's also a way that everybody makes a lot of messes and a lot of damage in the world. There's a lot of waste, a lot of destruction of the environment, a lot of oppression by one group of another. It all happens through various business contacts. Well, what if those big businesses also had this way of relating? If you're going to do business in India, your people have to learn Indian music. If you're going to do business in another part of the world, that culture has to be something that not only you experience, but that you learn from, and that people relate that way. So we're thinking about many possibilities here. One of the other theories, and I love people's reactions to this, is there's a psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman. And Marty Seligman has been a major figure in the United States for a long time. He studied and he became a global expert on depression. And the funny thing is that he he studied depression so long that he became pretty depressed about it. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And so what he did was he started studying instead resilience and happiness. And happiness research is a whole part of how, you know, of our related field, our cousin field of psychology. Well, one of the things that was interesting in one of his lectures was that there's different levels of happiness and pleasure that people experience. And some of them are less profound and some of them are life-changing. So the least profound is ice cream and really good food, because it's good, but it doesn't actually change your mood. You know, you go right back to the same problems if you're in them, or if you're happy, you continue in your happiness. So it's an enhancer for a short time, but the research suggests it's not very long lasting. Much more long lasting is something called flow. When you're in the flow of something, that does something to the mind and the heart that's powerful, and it can lead to a happier life. But here's the trick, and a lot of people in music and dance and the arts are in this category. You can be in flow all day long, but if you don't really have a deeper purpose and meaning and ethic to your life, you can be miserable as soon as the flow turns off. So a lot of people, and Seligman was brilliant about this. He knew somebody who was on the stock market 9 hours a day, and he was in the flow. He didn't notice that he wasn't eating. He didn't care. He was fulfilled 9 hours a day, but he was the most miserable person that Seligman had ever met, because he didn't even like what he was doing. He just was in the flow. So there's a lot of musicians like that too. So this is leading to a higher level. And the higher level is what we have been suggesting. And that is the meaningfulness of your life in terms of what you can give to the world. In other words, and Erik Erikson and many others and all the great religious philosophers, the ones who truly are spiritual, not the ones who are involved in warfare and all of that stuff, but the people who truly are spiritual and the great minds of history, they all recognized something beyond flow, and that is the place of meaning. And that place of deep meaning is invariably what you can give to others. Many of the great philosophers, when I wrote my dissertation on my book, Rabbi Luzzatto, he said he had great suffering in his life. He lost 4 out of his 8 kids. He lost both his wives, you know, both first one and then the other, all to illness and starvation. And he came to a conclusion that the only thing that life can't take away from you is your ability to be compassionate to others. And so he cherished the time that he could give that compassion to the people in his family that was sick. That was what gave him meaning to his life and purpose and strength. So I think that's where we can make a kind of a deal with the people in the arts, with the people who are singing and dancing, is that sing and dance all you want, but in the end of the day, we have to all work together on what makes it meaningful. And what makes it meaningful is that higher level of what we can give to the earth and give to each other and give really to total strangers. That's what I get off on. I get a kick ever since I was in my 20s for the fact that I can meet somebody who's totally different than me, maybe from an enemy group, meet them on the street. I can smile or say 2 words to them. They can start to cry because of the words I chose. I get off on that. That's like dance to me. I just can't tell you how the biggest flow moments of my life were exactly that. How many words I had with an angry cab driver to make that angry cab driver start to cry. I did it, you know. I did it just by thinking about what does he need the most, and how can I demonstrate the opposite of what he's expecting from me. It's called shock and surprise, and we know in neuroscience, very big thing is that shock and surprise, like clowns, it delights the mind, it lights up all of the neurons, and it changes you. And you want the cloud, you want the shock and surprise to be a good shock. You want it to be a shock of joy, of meaning, of gratitude, of compassion. Because I got to tell you, we're in competition out there with people who shock in other ways that are terrible, with fear, with intimidation, with I'm telling you what to do. There's lots of competition for the brain. And we're suggesting that you're in the flow, you guys out there singing and dancing, and make it a strong flow for meaning and for cherishing the world. And then it'll be kind of unbeatable. So I'm just interested in some other thoughts from going around again to everybody. So Lisa, what are your thoughts that you can add to the conversation?
Well, thanks, Mark and Nick, for your contributions. I think it does have a lot to do with sort of how our body processes information. So I was really appreciating that all three of us were talking about that. I call myself a non-professional artist. So I use art to bring myself happiness. I'm not sure my art brings other people happiness, but I'm a painter, and I make music, and I'm not professional at all. I just do it because it improves my state of being. It helps me process things when I can't find a way to articulate the loss I have experienced from friends dying or whatever situation. So, I think that the arts, music, dancing, painting, all of them, we have to also embrace the fact that our world wants to professionalize these things and tell us that we need special training to be able to do them. And what we need to realize is the creator of the universe has given each one of us the power of creation, the power to create a dance with our bodies, or music with our voices. And so taking back that sort of ability that the divine has given us to create, and saying, I don't need training to do this. I don't need, I've never taken a painting class, but I love painting. I love moving colors on the page because it heals me. It makes me feel better. I get into that flow you're talking about, Mark. And I think so, just sort of embracing each of our ability to do whatever art we feel like doing, and not seeing it as this professional thing that we need other people's approval to say, that's a good painting, because I probably won't ever get that.
I think I was just thinking of, we talk about peace, and we never really talk about much what really peace looks like. But I think by utilizing art and, whether it's painting or whether it's, song, music, or, dance, we are actually shaping it. So we're giving it vision. So I think that's very important for us to realize that we are creators of peace, and that's one strong mechanism that we can do it through.
Right. I mean, I want to add to that in many ways, what we're doing is a work of art, but it's not a typical art. But this is artwork. What Friar Ivo did in Sarajevo is artwork. What we do is a kind of art. I feel it as art very often, and I know you do also. And I think that we need to encourage people to see the artistic side. My program, I direct a center at a master's program at George Mason University, and an undergraduate program and a PhD program. And I direct a center that oversees a lot of students, etc. And I can tell you that this is the dance is that when you are doing peace building, I try to tell my students that it's an art form. But when you're analyzing what you may do and also reflecting on what you did do, it becomes a science, because reflection is science. But when you're in the moment, it's a flow. And it's sometimes a good flow, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're incredibly on and generous and powerful, and sometimes you're incredibly narcissistic and self-absorbed, and you screw up the situation. And then you look and you examine it, but you examine it as a science and say, what did I do well? What didn't I do well? And that guy is in peace building. Look at the way he treated his worker. That's not peace building. And so you analyze it, right? Because you have to, because that's what good science does. But it's also, when you're doing it, it's a flow and it's an art, which I also want to say to all of you around the world, come study with us. You know, come study with us. We're really radical. We're in favor of you as practitioners. And I catch hell for it all the time, but come and do a master's with us, come and do a bachelor's with us. We would love to study with you and build peace builders all over the world. And Nick can attest to that. Nick keeps me sane in my school and in my environment. So Nick, do you have any last thoughts?
I try to keep you sane. I don't know how good I am at it, but I do try. Well, yeah, y'all are all connecting a lot of dots for me. Many moons ago in another lifetime, I was an actor and director. And I hadn't thought about peace and conflict resolution practice, I guess, as a performance. Nowadays, I consider my medium as writing. Even if I'm doing a journal article or something, I'm trying to get into the flow, right? And my journal articles are really laden with emotion, and you can tell that I'm trying to write for a science piece. But you're getting the Nick Sherwood, story. You're getting the Nick Sherwood opinion for sure. Lisa and Mark, you both raised at various points. Well, Lisa, when you wrote about jazz, or when you spoke about jazz and improv, what I did a lot in my acting days was a lot of comedic improv, and I can, linking that to your comment, Mark, about practice as art. When we're in the field at any given moment in time, we have a tactical set of behaviors, of choices that we can make. And I hadn't really put it together that when you're in front of a member of an enemy system or an ally or a collaborator or whatever, this is also a scene partner. And so you've got to decide in any given moment how you're going to improv all of this out, right? And Mark, you are astoundingly correct. Sometimes you're narcissistic and you take up way too much space in the scene. Sometimes you're super altruistic, and not you, don't think I'm talking about you, but sometimes. Yes, and sometimes you're super altruistic and you're giving to a fault, and you've given it all, and then you retreat from the scene, you retreat from the stage, and you're drained, and you have to recharge, right? And so that's another dimension of all of this that we have to keep in mind. Is I think that there's maybe all of us at one point or another, we have left too much on the stage, or too much on the canvas, or too much in our instrument or whatever. That's another side of all of this that I've been keenly interested in for quite some time, is the mental health of artists. There's a lot of very controversial research that some of the most profound artists, most creative artists that we have, some of them have symptoms of bipolar disorder, of depression, of anxiety, et cetera. And so this has been one of the big questions in the mental health of artists is it necessary to have some sort of thing to push people into a creative space? And I'm not sure, I don't presume to have an answer to any of that, but I do want to highlight that what we do, this is part of the specialty, the uniqueness of what peace, the process of making peace is I do think that sometimes we're given a clean slate. Sometimes we're given a slate that someone's already written half of a story on, and it's up to us as practitioners as to where the story is going to go. But yeah, I guess I hadn't really, framed it like that in any given moment, we are acting out peace scenes and we're serving as directors, et cetera.
I love the idea of you can be putting yourself too much out there or not enough, or retreating too much or not going in enough. And it's just, that's a really interesting balancing act, and it definitely is theater. A lot of it is theater. There's no doubt. Lisa, you had a thought on that.
I just wanted to sort of add one more thought, and that is that art, some people think of art as beauty, And I actually think that that conception of peace as beauty is one that was really helpful to me. So that we know when we feel something beautiful or we see something beautiful, it's a feeling that's inside of us. And I think that's also what we're talking about often when we say peace, because peace is beautiful when you feel that, even in the middle of a war. You know, you have these beautiful moments. And I just think in a conversation on the arts and peace building, I just wanted to say that, just like notice the similarity between beauty and peace. And maybe the opposite of violence is not peace. Maybe the opposite of violence is beauty.
That is a wonderful note. I think that's where I think we should come to a conclusion today. Reza, would you like us to mention anything else, or you're such a wonderful host?
And no, thank you very much. We're going to add lots of more materials on a website. Thanks a lot to Andy, especially, and Air Dance TV, that they have done a great work. So we're going to have a great show on the Saturday. So, and there are going to be lots of music, dancing, and from all around the world.
It's wonderful to meet all of you, and Andy, wonderful to meet you, and really privileged to contribute, and to all of you who are singing and dancing around the world. I can tell you from the bottom of my heart that each and every one of your cultures is something that we have loved, and we would like to get to know you more. And so dance well, and take care. Be safe.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.